I've spent a lot of time in my career defending the institution of marriage, and I defend it because it's the bedrock of civilization, so it deserves defending. Some right-wing influencers with legions of young, mostly male fans have decided that men should abandon marriage and family life and go their own way. Now, one of these influencers is a woman named Pearl Davis, who has garnered a relatively large following on YouTube and various social media platforms. She's in her mid-20s, single and childless, and yet full of opinions about modern marriage and family life, a subject that she has no personal insight into whatsoever. She spent the past few days on the internet complaining about quote-unquote tradcons like myself, who, she says, promote the nuclear family despite not understanding what it's really like. Yes, we men who actually have wives and children don't know what it's like to be married, but a woman who is not married and has no children does know what it's like.
Should young men still get married given the current state of divorce laws and feminism and everything we deal with in our culture? That is the debate in today's video as we react to some right-wing drama recently where Matt Walsh and a lot of the Daily Wire people have been going back and forth with Pearl Davis. If you don't know who Pearl is, she is basically one of those red pill influencers and very recently has been tweeting a lot, basically advocating that men should not get married or have children or start families because of the way that the current divorce laws can absolutely screw over men. Now, in a second here, I do want to play Matt Walsh's response video to Pearl just so we can contextualize the entire situation. And then I'll give you my thoughts because I have a lot to say about this. But right off the gate, the first thing I will say about the marriage versus no marriage question is that Pearl and the red pill movement are right about the current state of divorce laws and the way that they very often are weaponized against men. And I don't think men should be naive to that. And we certainly should be a little bit maybe more cautious these days than the guys in the 1950s were, because yes, you're dealing with the situation, you're dealing with the current reality of society. But at the same time, yes, things in this world are much more difficult. On all regards, it's much more difficult to get married. It's much more difficult to have a bunch of kids and own a house and just live the American dream. But I fundamentally do not believe that it is the manly or masculine thing to do to run away from our masculine imperative simply because things are harder and potentially more dangerous given the current circumstances. So just to contextualize how I feel about this, like I said, after we react, I'm going to get more into this. I think that, yes, while they're right about divorce laws and all that stuff, what's the solution? Because to me, any solution that literally just says, let's not have families, let's not proliferate the future generations, I mean, really, what does that even solve? Society can't continue without us producing more babies, much less can we ever have a hope to take back society if we ourselves do not proliferate the future generations. So I think that there is a middle ground you can reach between the traditional view and the red pill view that I will explain here in a second. But first, let's contextualize by listening to the Matt Walsh response video.
I've spent a lot of time in my career defending the institution of marriage, and I defend it because it's the bedrock of civilization, so it deserves defending. And I defend it because it's under constant attack, so it needs defending.
And again, this is true. Marriage is the bedrock of civilization because family is the bedrock of civilization. And the retreating from that, to retreat from marriage, is to basically retreat from civilization. And yes, perhaps things are so bad that it's all going to go up in flames and we should just watch it burn. But again, is that truly the masculine thing to do, to just be in a bad situation and say, I'm going to let that building burn down instead of going there and try to save it, right? So that's where I do agree with Matt.
And one of the most troubling developments in recent years, which we've discussed on this show in the past, is that these attacks are increasingly waged not just from the left, but from certain noisy segments of the right as well. Some right-wing influencers with legions of young, mostly male fans have decided that men should abandon marriage and family life and go their own way. And these influencers, many of whom consider themselves a part of the so-called red pill movement, pretend to despise feminists and yet have essentially arrived at the same conclusion as feminists, which is that we should give up on the family. The two sides hate marriage almost as much as they hate each other.
And yeah, that's just a bad idea. Now, like I said, not talking about Matt Walsh, but is it true that sometimes the trad side is a little bit delusional about marriage and kind of wants to sell you a 1950s cliche that is not practical for most people? Absolutely. But I'd argue that's probably a little bit less destructive than flat out saying don't get married. But we'll talk more in a second. But first, let's talk about your financial future. Folks, the U.S. economy is in trouble, which of course means that the U.S. dollar is in trouble. And I don't need to tell you that because you live in this country and have to buy the same things that I do. This is why it has never been a better time to get rid of some of that liquid cash and start investing in the smart things for the future. Now, when most people hear the term investing, they think to either crypto or the stock market. But if you've seen the states of those the past few years, you will also know that those two are volatile, unstable, and dangerous. And this is why it has never been a better time to invest in stable assets like precious metals. And our friends over at Noble Gold can help you do that. They can walk you through all of the best ways to invest in gold and silver, whether you have some spare cash sitting around and just want to purchase some for a rainy day, or transfer existing IRAs and retirement accounts into physical gold and silver. Be sure to go check them out. Our friends at Noble Gold have a 5-star rating from the Better Business Bureau and have been walking customers like you for years through the best ways to invest in precious metals. There are no games. There are no scams here. They will contact you and simply assess your current situation and give you all the different options in the ways to invest in gold and silver. So be sure to go check them out at thevincedao.com. Again, that is thevincedao.com. There's a contact form there. They will be in touch with you. Or if you'd like to call them directly and don't want to wait, feel free to give them a call during the weekdays at 877-646-5347. Again, that is 877-646-5347. Do not wait. Do not gamble with your financial future. Invest today with Noble Gold.
These influencers is a woman named Pearl Davis, who has garnered a relatively large following on YouTube and various social media platforms. She's in her mid-20s, single and childless, and yet full of opinions about modern marriage and family life, a subject that she has no personal insight into whatsoever. She spent the past few days on the internet complaining about quote-unquote trad cons like myself, who she says promote the nuclear family despite not understanding what it's really like. Yes, we men who actually have wives and children don't know what it's like to be married, but a woman who is not married and has no children does know what it's like. In one of her tweets, she wrote, quote, "The trad cons push marriage because they aren't old enough to know better. They don't know the reality of what they're pushing." This is accompanied by a picture of myself.
Okay, yeah, this is just, I have no beef with Pearl personally, but this is just not a good argument. Because first of all, they're in their 30s. So, you know, if they were in their 60s, maybe you could say they're out of touch. They're not super old. Now, an argument she could make that I might subscribe to is saying, well, they're all millennials, so they don't really know how it is in terms of Gen Z and getting into Gen Alpha, in terms of the way dating for us is probably different than even when they were dating. And I could buy that argument. But the idea, I don't know, they're not old enough to know better yet because apparently they're going to all get divorced at 50 years old or something. I don't understand what she's trying to get at there, but.
Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, we aren't old enough to know better and don't know the reality of what we're pushing, yet a woman who is younger than us and single does know better and does understand this reality. Another post, she goes on to say that marriage is a terrible deal for men. And she later explains, quote, "Would you ever sign a contract that fails 75% of the time where your business partner is paid to break the contract? Why would you encourage men to sign that contract until the terms are fixed?"
Okay, I will say about this, she does raise a somewhat legitimate point in this tweet, but there's a very simple solution to it that I'll explain in a second. Okay, but let's
just where your business
finish this
partner
up.
is paid to break the contract. Why would you encourage men to sign that contract until the terms are fixed? Now, you may be surprised to learn that marriages fail at a rate of 75%. The figure that people like this normally use is 50%. And the claim that 50% of marriages end in divorce is already spurious, and we'll have more on that in a moment, but 75%? I was wondering where that number came from. All
right, so then Matt Walsh basically gets into different divorce statistics and stuff. We get the idea between what this debate is really about. So how do I feel about all of this? Well, first of all, because I don't want to make this about personal beef, let's forget Matt for a second. Let's forget Pearl and contextualize it in the greater context of the red pill versus trad traditional conservative debate, okay? And obviously you have the very traditional view that says everyone should get married and have a bunch of kids and do so young like people did in the 1950s, all of that. The red pill movement is basically the polar extreme of the opposite of that, saying it's so broken these days, men just shouldn't get married at all, or at least that's what some people in the red pill movement are saying. Let me say, I hate to be that guy, but let me say that I think, generally speaking, again, removing these two individuals, generally speaking, both sides make good points and bad points in this debate, okay? So let me tell you where I agree with the trad movement is the very simple thing, which is that every man should strive to be married and have kids. I mean, that's in many ways one of your biggest masculine imperatives on this earth is to have a family, to extend your genetic legacy. And I think every red pill person, which is not all of them, but the ones who do discourage that or tell men to get vasectomies. I've heard that take given before. That's just wrong. That's just insane. That's just stupid. Okay. Having children is one of the most important things you can do on this earth as a man. And any movement, whether that's left wing or right wing, telling men not to do that is completely backwards and wrong. And frankly, in many ways, I'd argue satanic. But anyways, where I will say, though, that I do agree maybe more with the red pill side is that the 1950s cliche of what everything kind of is or should be maybe is a false bill of goods for a lot of people in this country. Not everyone, but a lot of people, and maybe doesn't work so much anymore. So this idea of, marry your high school sweetheart at 18, 19 years old. Again, if you're able to do that and it works for you, great. But I think just given the way society currently is, from an economic perspective as well as a cultural perspective, maybe that cliche of a traditional marriage doesn't necessarily work anymore. But we'll talk more about that in a second, okay? And they further are right that about the divorce law things. They're absolutely right that divorce laws are written to destroy men. In many ways, the divorce laws as they currently exist incentivize women to get divorced financially because it literally benefits them and it allows them to go take a bunch of money and basically just run away. And men are right to be worried about that and be skeptical about that while entering marriage. And so the red pill movement is right about that. They are lastly right that the average caliber of woman has gone down. So it is absolutely true that your average woman these days is probably a woman with a lot more problems, a little bit more of a, kind of a H word, right? Than your average woman was in the 1950s. And by the way, I think that's true of men as well. I think the just caliber of people in society has overall gone down, which is to say it is certainly much harder to find a good, virtuous woman now than your grandparents did in the 1950s. Most of our grandparents literally describe, oh yeah, they just met, at a bar or restaurant somewhere and 3 months later they were married. That's a lot harder to do these days. And because of all of that, I do think that there are legitimate concerns that the red pill movement brings up that maybe sometimes the traditional side and a lot of older folks maybe that didn't grow up in this generation are not necessarily aware of, right? So that puts me in this tricky position where on one hand, I do hold to the traditional ideal, and I think any attempt to upend that or just not fulfill that is wrong. But I think we also have to recognize the current reality of American culture and life. So my position is ultimately this, and this is my position as a man. And keep in mind, what I'm about to do is mostly speaking to men because I am a man. So I think men, young men, should still pursue marriage and family. As bad as things are, as harder as it is to maybe find these days, it should still be what we aspire to. It is wrong to give up on the dream just because the dream is much harder to achieve. But with that said, I do think that it is also good for men to be smart about that and protect themselves from the current system. Protect yourself from a lot of evil women out there these days and a lot of the divorce laws as they currently exist. And there are ways that I think are very easy for men to do that. And let me go over them right now. First of all, I will say, because of the way things currently work, young men, this is my advice. This is my answer. We can call this the Vince pill. Get married and hope to get married, but do not feel pressured into rushing into marriage, okay? I know maybe this is where I differ from the trad side a little bit, which is they will say, get married as fast as possible, basically rush into it like your grandparents did. But like I said, given the way things work these days, you do need to cross-examine the woman that you are dating. And sometimes that takes longer than it used to. And by the way, for women dating men, I would say the same thing, right? It is okay to wait a little bit. It's okay to get married at a little bit older of an age than your grandparents did. Don't wait forever, obviously, but it's okay. If you're 21, 22, even 25, 28 years old and you're not married yet, do not feel pressured by this trad movement to rush into a bad decision, is what I'm overall saying about that. And, that's the way I would see it. Again, is that ideal? No. Is it ideal to get married and have a family as young as at a younger age than we currently do in society? Absolutely. But again, I think we have to be idealistic and practical at the same time. That's my big thing on all of this, okay? So again, not ideal, but I think it's smart to try not to get screwed over. All right, secondly, as it comes to divorce laws, this may be a flaming hot take. I assume this is going to be very controversial with a lot of people, but my answer as to the best way as a man to avoid the terrible divorce laws as they currently exist, and here's my answer to Pearl Davis: sign a prenup. Sign a prenuptial agreement. And I know what you're going to say. I know what people are going to say. How can you, as a Christian or a conservative, support prenups? Isn't that encouraging divorce? To which I would say, yes, in my ideal society, there would literally be no such thing as a prenup, but neither would the current divorce laws exist. Again, I am arguing that we should both pursue marriage and also think practically and wisely with discernment about the situation you currently have to deal with. And so here's my thing. Ideally, you marry the type of woman that this is never an issue with, and you should seek out that type of woman. But ultimately, you never know. Especially these days, right? You never know if you're getting conned. You never know if people change, even if at the time they totally shared your values. Heck, I know people who have met on Christian missions, and 10 years later, the wife totally switched up and became some crazy feminist who was literally trying to trans their own child. James Younger, look up that story. That's all true. So I would say there's nothing wrong with trying to protect yourself given current laws and given current divorce laws. I actually think in many ways, to the people who say prenups are advocating divorce, I actually think they de-incentivize divorce, because they de-incentivize, especially if you have a traditional dynamic where the man is the breadwinner. Again, if you want a traditional marriage, that's how it goes. It de-incentivizes the woman from potentially turning on you, turning evil, divorcing you because she can't take your livelihood from you. In the context of today's society, I think it actually encourages you two to sit there and work it out instead of immediately rushing to divorce on purpose. And so, that's my thing. That's my thing, is that if you want to avoid divorce laws, if you kind of want to de-incentivize potentially your woman from ruining your life later on, I don't think anything is wrong currently with a prenup. And everyone always complains, oh, divorce laws, look how they screw over men. Again, the prenup is a very simple way legally to avoid American divorce laws, which obviously are very broken and screwed up. But that's my 2 cents on it. Get married, have kids, start a family. But again, don't be naive about it. Don't be delusional about it. Be smart, protect yourself while you do it, especially as a man. And, don't feel pressured into not doing it. Don't subscribe to naive cliches. Try your best to deal with the current situation and then win the game as it currently exists. That's my 2 cents. Just be practical about it and do the best you can. And, on one hand, I would say don't be delusional, but on the other hand, don't just retreat from the current situation. Again, as bad as things are, there literally is no future for anything. if you do not fulfill your masculine imperative, or enough men do not fulfill their imperative to get married and have families. So I don't think that's the answer. But with that said, folks, you can let me know what you think about all of this down in the comment section below. You know, keep in mind, all of the solutions I gave in this video are considering that we don't live in my ideal society, right? But I think, you know, you're never going to have your ideal society. So you have to consider what's the best way to do this given the current society. So that's how I feel about it. Be sure to check out our friends over at Noble Gold before you go. And until next time, Alpha Moves Only. God bless. Have a very good day and peace.